Hey everyone, and welcome to your C# tutorial on the relationship between loops and arrays. Okay, so let's begin by just quickly reviewing what a loop and an array is, right? And so previously I gave you some really thorough definitions. Right now I'd like to sort of give you a slightly less thorough definition that just gives a general idea of what each item that we'll be talking about does. Let's begin with arrays. So an array is we can think of an array as a collection of similar data. And we can think of a loop as a repeatable process applied to data. So you can see how these two things kind of go together, right? So where an array is a collection of similar data, a loop is a repeatable process that's applied to data. So it, makes sense that you would want to use a loop and an array together, because a loop can do things over and over and over again, and an array can supply that data over and over and over again. So real quick, let's just take a look at a basic for loop. So as we know, we can create a for loop by initializing a variable here, and then we say that we have a condition here that makes sure that the for loop runs, and we have an increment here that can add 1 to our variable to make sure that the for loop eventually does reach 5 and will stop. So if we print this out, say value of I equals plus I. Let's run it. And we're going to see values 0 through 4. Cool. So we see values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this prints out, this is 5 elements. And so it's pretty simple. We talked about this before. I gets initialized to 0. This code runs. We add 1 to I, and then we check it. I is less than 5. So now I equals 1. We come through, we print it. I equals 1. We check it with 5, and then we can run it again. We just keep doing it over and over and over again. So now let's create an array of strings, and we will call this list of fruit, and we will set it equal to new string array, and we will say that this is 5 fruits long. Okay, cool. So we have our list of fruit array. We just need to fill it in. So list of fruit. And we will access the first element using the 0 index. And we'll say this is equal to apples. List of fruit. 1, we will say this is equal to bananas. The fruit. 2, this is equal to blueberries. It's fruit. We'll go through here, and we will say blackberries. I think blueberries is one word, sorry. List of fruit. 4 equals oranges. And there we go. So those are our 5 elements. And so now when we go down here, we should be able to print out our list of fruit. And now we can use I as the index here to access each element in list of fruit, because we saw over here that the value of I is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And over here we have indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So as I gets incremented through the loop, we can use I in the same way that we use these numbers over here. So we'll pass in I to list of fruit as an index, and it will be able to grab these values. And so we'll be able to print them out here. So let's close this, and we're going to say fruit value at index I, at index, plus I equals, okay, plus sign here. Okay, so we're basically going to print out the fruit value at index I, and that'll print out the value of I, and then equals list of fruit at index I. So it'll print out the value of the list. So let's run it. Cool. So we see fruit value at index 0 is apples, fruit value at index 1 is bananas, fruit value at index 2 is blueberries, and fruit value at index 3 is blackberries. Fruit value at index 4 is oranges. Awesome. So that works exactly how we thought it would. Close that. So now, what if we don't know what length the array is going to be? How do we loop through? How do we use our for loop to loop through an array if we don't know the length of the array? Well, this is actually easily solvable, because when you create a new array like this, it gives you access to certain properties of the array. And one of those properties is length. So what we can do is we can come back into our for loop here, and instead of saying I needs to be less than 5, we can say I needs to be less than list of fruit dot length. So here we are accessing our list of fruit and saying, what is the length of it? So the length is the number of elements in the array. Length of an array is the number of elements inside the array. So down here, we know that the number of elements inside our array is 5, right? So this is going to equal 5. So it's going to be the same as we had it before, but now if we change our list of fruit and we add like a 6th element, this will update automatically. Okay, so let's run it and see if it does the same thing. Awesome. So it does do the same thing. So in the in our code block, we printed out all of the elements in the array. Perfect. So let's close this. Inside of these code blocks, I know that I'm only using console write lines, but you can use if statements, you can use other for loops, you can write any code that you want. You can't define, or you shouldn't define, methods or functions in here, but you can write any other logical code. You can call methods, you can do whatever you want in these blocks. So What I'm going to do now is I'd like to show you a for each loop. So in the same way that a for loop can iterate through or loop through an array or a list, a for each loop can do the same. But you start off a for each loop by writing for each. We'll do an open and closed parentheses and then an open and closed curly braces. Now in a for each loop, you're going to need to know what your list of items is. List of items. You're going to have to pass that into the for each loop. You're also going to need to know what each item is, right? You're going to need to know what your list of items is, and you're going to need to know what each item is. And so you're basically going to loop through. In your for each loop, you're going to pull from your list of items, you're going to pull an item, and then pass it into this scope. But inside of this scope, that item needs a variable name and a variable type. So over here, you will give it its variable name and variable type. So let's pass in our list of items, and we will call it list of fruit. And what is each item going to be? So each item in list of fruit is a string, and each value in here is a fruit. So we will say our item type is string, and we'll call it fruit. We'll use our in keyword. So there is a fruit in list of fruits. So for each fruit in list of fruit, you're going to execute this code. And so, we will do another console.writeLine, and we will say fruit in for each loop, and we will print out fruit. So what is happening here is that C# gives you for each loops to make your life easier. So instead of writing this code, I is equal to 0, I is less than list of fruit.length, I++, C# lets you write this code, which is a little bit easier to read, but behind the scenes, the computer is really doing basically this right here. So what this for each loop is doing is it's using the list of fruit. It's taking an item from the list of fruit, and it's taking the value of that element in the array or that item, and it's putting that value into the string fruit here. And then in this scope, we can refer to fruit as the variable name, and we can use that fruit variable as if it was an element from this list of fruit. So I'll run this code and you can see how that works. So here we have our first for loop, and we can see index 0 is apples, index 1 is bananas, index 2 is blueberries. And down in our for each loop, we can see that we're printing out the same elements. So really, our for each loop does the same thing as our for loop, except it's a little bit easier to read, And so you don't have to use one or the other. They both do the same thing. You can use whichever one you prefer. Some people prefer a for each loop because it's easy to read. Other people prefer a for loop because they can see exactly what's happening. So whatever you like to use, that's your preference. So just to review, this is how arrays and loops work together. An array is a collection of similar data, and a loop is a repeated process applied to that data. So it makes sense that these two things would go hand in hand. All right, guys. Thank you for paying attention through this whole tutorial. This is how arrays and loops work together.